My name is Aline Shaw, and my honeymoon became a true mourning because on that day, the man I loved so deeply, my husband, died inside me. It all began like something out of a romance novel I might have hidden beneath schoolbooks years ago. I had always been the kind of woman who observed the world in details, sensing nuances others overlooked. That morning in Charleston, South Carolina, the sky was an almost painted shade of blue, and the magnolia trees stood like silent witnesses to the vows we were about to exchange. Everything was meticulously planned. The ceremony was set in the courtyard of an elegant historic mansion, surrounded by ivy-covered walls and the gentle hum of a string quartet. Every flower, every ribbon, every line spoken by the officiant had been chosen with care. And there he was, Ethan Miller, waiting at the altar with that signature grin that had disarmed me from the very first date. His presence was magnetic. Tall, confident, with eyes that could shift from warmth to mystery in a blink. To our friends and family, he was a man of devotion and charm. To me, he had become home, or so I thought. As I walked toward him, holding my father's arm, I felt a wave of emotion so intense it nearly brought me to my knees. It wasn't just love. It was surrender. I was handing him my life, believing in every word we had promised. The vows were perfect. "You are my always," he whispered, his voice just loud enough for me to hear. My heart bloomed inside my chest. We kissed under an arch of white roses as cameras flashed, and people clapped. Toasts were made. Speeches delivered. We danced to our song beneath crystal chandeliers. For everyone watching, it was a fairy tale coming to life. That night, we flew to a secluded beach resort known for its privacy and luxury. It was all soft linens, candlelit dinners, and the soothing hush of waves. Our suite overlooked the ocean, and rose petals had been carefully scattered across the bed. Champagne waited on ice. Ethan wrapped his arms around me from behind, whispering that this was only the beginning. I turned to face him, our eyes meeting. His smile was tender. But just for a second, barely noticeable, a flicker crossed his face. A brief, almost imperceptible hesitation. Like his mind had wandered somewhere it shouldn't. I saw it. No one else would have. But I noticed. Because I always notice. And in that single breath, something shifted. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was being ridiculous. It had been a long day. Emotions were high. My mind was playing tricks on me. But a quiet unease had begun to grow inside me like a bruise. We made love that night. He touched me gently, whispered sweet things, but it felt like a performance. There was no urgency, no fire. Just routine. I smiled, kissed him, responded as I was expected to. But somewhere in that room, something sacred broke. Afterward, as he drifted off to sleep beside me, I lay still, staring at the ceiling. I listened to his breathing slow, to the occasional crash of the tide below our balcony. And I thought about the years ahead. About the house we planned to buy, the children we had talked about having. I tried to picture it all and feel joy. But all I felt was a tightness in my chest and a question that wouldn't let go: why did he hesitate? I closed my eyes and tried to chase sleep, but my mind raced. What if it was nothing? A fluke moment of distraction? But then again, what if it was everything? I remembered how, a few weeks before the wedding, he had suddenly gone silent for a whole evening, blaming a work emergency. I had accepted it. Trusted him. Because that's what love was supposed to be. But love also meant listening to the voice inside me that now whispered something was wrong. The next morning, I put on the white robe provided by the resort and stepped onto the balcony. The sea was calm, almost too still, and the sun hadn't fully risen yet. Ethan appeared behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Morning, Mrs. Miller," he said with a kiss to my shoulder. I forced a smile. "Morning." He pulled me close. "You okay?" "Of course," I said, leaning back against him. But even my voice betrayed me, a little colder, a little too smooth. We spent the day like newlyweds are supposed to: breakfast in bed, long walks by the water, shared laughter and sun-kissed photos. But behind every smile I offered, I was observing. Noticing how his phone was always locked. How he never left it unattended. How he seemed a little too interested in checking it when he thought I wasn't looking. And every time his fingers hovered over the screen, I felt that tightness grow stronger. I was beginning to realize something terrifying. My dream wedding had been just that, a dream. And now that the dream had passed, I was waking up to something I couldn't name yet. Not fully. But I could feel it like a storm gathering on the horizon. And deep down, I already knew the life I thought I had just begun wasn't mine at all. It belonged to a stranger. A man who had looked me in the eye, held my hand, vowed eternity, and still, behind all of it, hid something else entirely. And that night, as he kissed me goodnight and turned off the lamp, I lay in the dark and whispered to myself, this isn't what it seems. Watch closely. It was the second night of our honeymoon, and something in the air already felt colder, though the weather remained warm. Ethan was in the bathroom, whistling softly as he shaved. I sat on the edge of the bed, the sound of waves barely audible through the open balcony doors. My mind was a battlefield, trying to make sense of the unease, trying to believe the version of reality I had committed to just days before. But then my phone rang. And everything changed. Unknown number. No name. Just a vibration and a sound that pierced the silence like a warning. I picked it up, hesitating for a moment before sliding my finger across the screen. Hello? A pause. Then a voice, female, low, slow, and dripping with venom-laced sarcasm. You're not the only one. That was all she said. 4 words. No name, no explanation. But the tone, the confidence in that whisper, it chilled me. My body froze. The phone slipped slightly from my ear, but I didn't hang up. I waited, breath caught in my throat. But she was gone. No follow-up. No second message. Just silence and the echo of a truth I hadn't wanted to consider. I looked toward the bathroom door, where I could still hear Ethan humming as the water ran. He was just feet away, smiling in the mirror, preparing for a night of romance with his new wife. And yet some woman, had just called my phone, knowing exactly where I was, knowing exactly what to say. I sat there, stunned, the device still in my hand, heartbeat thudding against my ribs. My palms were clammy, my chest tight. And then Ethan emerged, face clean, hair still damp, wearing that same contented, rehearsed smile. Who is that? He asked casually, noticing the phone in my hand. I swallowed hard, forcing my muscles to respond. Just a wrong number, I lied. He walked over, sat beside me, and took my hand. You okay? I nodded, too quickly. I meant what I said, he murmured, stroking my knuckles. You are the only one. Forever. I looked at him, my eyes searching his face. And I kissed him. Softly, deliberately. But there was no warmth in that kiss. It was hollow. Mechanical. My lips moved because they had to, not because they wanted to. He smiled, content with the illusion. But something inside me was shifting, twisting into something sharper. It was the way he said it, the only one, as if he could somehow sense the threat, as if he was already working to counter it. And yet, if it were true, if I really were the only one, why would he feel the need to say it again? Why now? That night, I lay beside him in the darkness, the sheets tangled between us, our bodies close but our spirits farther apart than ever. His breathing deepened, steady and slow, the sound of someone at peace. And I stayed awake, wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling. The call echoed in my mind over and over. You're not the only one. There was no trace of panic in her voice. No envy. No anger. Just certainty. Whoever she was, she wanted me to know. She wanted me to question everything. She wanted me to wake up. But why now? Why not before the wedding? Why wait until after the vows, after the legal bindings, after the promises had been made in front of witnesses? Because she wanted me to feel it. The betrayal. The humiliation. The rug pulled up from under my feet when I thought I was standing on solid ground. I had to know more. I had to find out who she was. What she knew. What she had seen or lived or lost. I stared at Ethan's silhouette beside me. He looked so peaceful, so innocent in sleep. But now, I couldn't unsee the hesitation in his smile from the night before. I couldn't unhear that voice on the phone. I couldn't unknow that this story, my story, was already fractured. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or shake him awake and demand the truth. I did what I always do. I listened to the silence. I let it speak. I memorized every detail of that night, how he turned in his sleep, how his hand brushed mine without waking, how the room smelled of salt and roses and something artificial. And I knew, with a growing certainty, that this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Someone wanted me to know the truth. And now, I would find it. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay beside Ethan in a bed that now felt colder than any ocean breeze, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of his breath. I waited for the sound to shift, deeper, more relaxed, until I was sure he had fallen completely asleep. My body remained still under the sheets, but my mind was no longer mine. It belonged to the woman who had called me, to the message that had shattered the illusion of my honeymoon. There was a phone on the nightstand. His. Just inches away from me. Ethan had never hidden it before. He would scroll through it in front of me, reply to messages, read aloud news headlines. It was never locked. But now, I realized, I had never thought to look past what he showed me. That trust had been a door I'd left open, never questioning what might walk through it. I reached for it slowly, careful not to disturb the sheets or the man who lay sleeping next to me. The screen lit up. A prompt for a passcode. My heart raced. I guessed it. His father's birthday, he had once told me it was the same code for everything, easy to remember. 6 digits. I entered them. The phone unlocked. I hesitated for a second. This wasn't who I was. I wasn't the woman who snooped, who suspected, who dug through shadows looking for truth. But I had become her now. Without choosing to. Without wanting to. I had been turned into her. I opened WhatsApp first. Nothing. No recent messages. No group chats. Not even spam. That alone was strange. Ethan was social, always exchanging messages with coworkers, cousins, friends from college. The app had been wiped. Or perhaps never used. I checked the deleted messages folder. Empty. I moved on to his regular texts. A few conversations. Mostly about work. One from his assistant about travel arrangements. Another from his brother about a weekend barbecue. All short, transactional. Nothing suspicious, but also nothing real. Then I opened his email. That was where the curtain finally lifted. There it was, a folder buried deep in the archive, named simply with a single letter. It seemed too nondescript to be important. But my instinct screamed otherwise. I tapped it. My screen filled with messages. Dozens. The earliest dated almost a year before our wedding. The most recent, less than 3 weeks ago. Every email was from the same sender, Rachel T. My heart clenched. The subject lines told a story all their own. Miss you already. Can't wait for next time. Last night was perfect. I clicked on the first message. A hotel reservation confirmation in Savannah. 2 adults. A king suite. The check-in date matched a weekend Ethan had told me he'd be in New York for a conference. I clicked the next one. Another hotel. This time in Atlanta. The same pattern. A reservation. 2 guests. The dates aligned with another supposed business trip. I opened an attachment. A photo, Rachel and Ethan, sitting in what looked like a hotel lounge. He had his arm around her shoulders, smiling at the camera. She was younger than me, with dark wavy hair and a look of naive joy in her eyes. I scrolled down. More photos. More smiles. More of him kissing her cheek, her holding his hand, the two of them wrapped in a hotel bathrobe. I stopped breathing. Each image stabbed deeper than the last. My thumb hovered over the screen, and I tapped another email. This one had no photos, just words. Words that etched themselves into my brain. Thank you for making me feel like I matter. You always know exactly what to say. I don't know how I got so lucky to find someone like you. Someone like you. I turned off the screen. Slowly. Methodically. I placed the phone back on the nightstand, exactly where I had found it, at the same angle, the same distance from the edge. I stood, walked silently to the bathroom, and locked the door behind me. I didn't cry. Not yet. I looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection didn't seem real. My wedding ring caught the light. I stared at it for a long time. It felt like a chain now. Not a promise. Not a symbol of love. Just a link to a lie. After some time, I returned to bed. Ethan shifted slightly as I climbed in, but didn't wake. I watched him again. His face so peaceful, so convincingly innocent. He looked like the man I had promised to build a life with. But I knew now, I had married a performance. A carefully rehearsed role played to perfection. And I had believed every scene. I lay there, eyes wide open, listening to the ocean outside and the sound of my own heartbeat. I replayed our wedding day in my mind. The way he looked at me. The way he said, "You are the only one." And I wondered now if he had used that same line with Rachel. Or others. My chest felt hollow. My limbs, numb. But my mind was sharpening. Something inside me, something I hadn't known existed, was waking up. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. Not yet. This wasn't going to be shouting, tears, or slammed doors. I wasn't going to give him that. This was going to be a silent war. One I would fight with patience, with precision, and with truth. I closed my eyes, but not to sleep. I closed them to see more clearly. I didn't sleep that night either. Sleep had become a luxury I could no longer afford. While Ethan slept beside me, breathing deeply like a man at peace with the world, I kept my eyes open, watching him through the dim light of the moon filtering in through the curtains. I studied the curve of his jaw, the way his hair fell onto his forehead, the stillness of his mouth, the same mouth that had kissed me, whispered promises, and told lies with effortless grace. I thought I would cry. But I didn't. I felt something different now. Something harder. Something colder. A space inside me, once filled with love, had emptied, and in its place, a quiet force was beginning to rise. Not anger. Not pain. Strategy. By dawn, I had already rehearsed 3 possible conversations and discarded them all. There would be no shouting, no ultimatums, no accusations. Not yet. What I needed now wasn't justice. It was clarity. I needed to understand who I had married, what kind of man he truly was behind the mask he wore so well. And I needed time. When the sun finally touched the edge of the ocean, Ethan stirred. He turned to me with a sleepy smile, kissed my shoulder, and asked, "Did you sleep?" I nodded. A little. He pulled me close. "You're quiet this morning." I kissed him lightly on the cheek. "Just overwhelmed with happiness," I said. He smiled, satisfied with the answer. We ordered breakfast, ate together on the balcony, laughed at something silly the waiter said. I played my part perfectly. I wore the robe with the embroidered initials of the resort, let my hair fall in soft waves, smiled for the selfies he took of us with the sea behind us. I even posted one to my own social media, writing a caption about how magical love was. But my mind wasn't here. It was far away, mapping a future I hadn't imagined before. A future that wouldn't include him the way he thought it would. I watched how he held his phone. How he typed, how quickly he put it face down when I looked in his direction. I began memorizing his behaviors. His tells. His reflexes. Every smile he gave me now was a puzzle piece I turned in my mind, looking for the edge that didn't fit. When we returned from the beach, I asked to borrow his phone, pretending I wanted to call my sister. He handed it to me without hesitation. I smiled as I took it, not to thank him, but to celebrate how easy it would be to keep going. He wasn't suspicious yet. He still believed in the illusion he had built around me. Back in our suite, while he showered, I took notes on a scrap of paper from the hotel desk. Names. Dates. Phrases from the emails I had read. Details I didn't want to forget. I folded the paper and slid it into a hidden pocket of my suitcase. That night, as he poured wine for both of us and toasted to forever, I drank slowly, my smile unwavering. But every sip was laced with a silent vow, this man would never see me coming. When we returned to our city days later, I didn't waste time. I began moving quietly, calculatingly. I changed the password to our shared safe, citing a vague concern about privacy. I called our real estate agent and asked for copies of all documents involving our apartment, pretending it was for our future financial planning. Then I made digital backups. Every contract, every asset we had signed together. I didn't stop there. At night, while Ethan slept, I began recording our conversations. I bought a discreet audio recorder, placing it under the nightstand, syncing it with my phone. I captured the way he spoke to me, warm, performative, hollow. I didn't know yet what I would need the recordings for. But I knew they would matter. One day, they would help me remember every inch of the lie. And then came the accountant. Ethan's accountant had always been pleasant but distant. He and I had only exchanged formalities during past events. But now, I made a point of visiting his office under the pretext of finalizing tax paperwork. I watched his expression carefully, spoke softly, feigned confusion about certain numbers. Ethan's always so busy, I said. Sometimes I feel like I'm the last to know about things. The accountant's response was cautious but revealing. He handles most things on his own. Always has. But if you ever need a second look at anything, I'd be happy to help. It was enough. I had found the first ally. A small crack in the wall Ethan had built. Later that week, I reached out to someone I never thought I would, Ethan's former business partner. A man who had vanished from Ethan's circle 2 years ago after what was described vaguely as a creative difference. I remembered his name. Knew how to find him. And when I did, I sent a simple message, I believe we've both trusted someone who didn't deserve it. He responded within an hour. The conversation was brief, in person, over coffee. He didn't ask questions. He just sat, listened, and told me a few things Ethan had never shared. Secrets about past ventures, silent manipulations, debts paid off under the table. Nothing illegal. But enough to add color to the portrait of the man I had married. And through it all, Ethan smiled at me each night. He kissed me. He made plans. He looked into my eyes and said he loved me. And I smiled back, because that was the role I had chosen to play, for now. I no longer wanted a confrontation. I wanted comprehension. And when the moment came, I wanted him to feel it, not as an attack, but as the quiet, devastating realization that he had never understood the woman he thought he had so carefully deceived. I didn't sleep that night either. Sleep had become a luxury I could no longer afford. While Ethan slept beside me, breathing deeply like a man at peace with the world, I kept my eyes open, watching him through the dim light of the moon filtering in through the curtains. I studied the curve of his jaw, the way his hair fell onto his forehead, the stillness of his mouth, the same mouth that had kissed me, whispered promises, and told lies with effortless grace. I thought I would cry. But I didn't. I felt something different now. Something harder. Something colder. A space inside me, once filled with love, had emptied, and in its place, a quiet force was beginning to rise. Not anger. Not pain. Strategy. By dawn, I had already rehearsed 3 possible conversations and discarded them all. There would be no shouting, no ultimatums, no accusations. Not yet. What I needed now wasn't justice. It was clarity. I needed to understand who I had married, what kind of man he truly was behind the mask he wore so well. And I needed time. When the sun finally touched the edge of the ocean, Ethan stirred. He turned to me with a sleepy smile, kissed my shoulder, and asked, "Did you sleep?" I nodded. A little. He pulled me close. "You're quiet this morning." I kissed him lightly on the cheek. "Just overwhelmed with happiness," I said. He smiled, satisfied with the answer. We ordered breakfast, ate together on the balcony, laughed at something silly the waiter said. I played my part perfectly. I wore the robe with the embroidered initials of the resort, let my hair fall in soft waves, smiled for the selfies he took of us with the sea behind us. I even posted one to my own social media, writing a caption about how magical love was. But my mind wasn't here. It was far away, mapping a future I hadn't imagined before. A future that wouldn't include him the way he thought it would. I watched how he held his phone. How he typed, how quickly he put it face down when I looked in his direction. I began memorizing his behaviors. His tells. His reflexes. Every smile he gave me now was a puzzle piece I turned in my mind, looking for the edge that didn't fit. When we returned from the beach, I asked to borrow his phone, pretending I wanted to call my sister. He handed it to me without hesitation. I smiled as I took it, not to thank him, but to celebrate how easy it would be to keep going. He wasn't suspicious yet. He still believed in the illusion he had built around me. Back in our suite, while he showered, I took notes on a scrap of paper from the hotel desk. Names. Dates. Phrases from the emails I had read. Details I didn't want to forget. I folded the paper and slid it into a hidden pocket of my suitcase. That night, as he poured wine for both of us and toasted to forever, I drank slowly, my smile unwavering. But every sip was laced with a silent vow, this man would never see me coming. When we returned to our city days later, I didn't waste time. I began moving quietly, calculatingly. I changed the password to our shared safe, citing a vague concern about privacy. I called our real estate agent and asked for copies of all documents involving our apartment, pretending it was for our future financial planning. Then I made digital backups. Every contract, every asset we had signed together. I didn't stop there. At night, while Ethan slept, I began recording our conversations. I bought a discreet audio recorder, placing it under the nightstand, syncing it with my phone. I captured the way he spoke to me, warm, performative, hollow. I didn't know yet what I would need the recordings for. But I knew they would matter. One day, they would help me remember every inch of the lie. And then came the accountant. Ethan's accountant had always been pleasant but distant. He and I had only exchanged formalities during past events. But now, I made a point of visiting his office under the pretext of finalizing tax paperwork. I watched his expression carefully, spoke softly, feigned confusion about certain numbers. "Ethan's always so busy," I said. "Sometimes I feel like I'm the last to know about things." The accountant's response was cautious but revealing. "He handles most things on his own. Always has. But if you ever need a second look at anything, I'd be happy to help." It was enough. I had found the first ally. A small crack in the wall Ethan had built. Later that week, I reached out to someone I never thought I would, Ethan's former business partner. A man who had vanished from Ethan's circle 2 years ago after what was described vaguely as a creative difference. I remembered his name. Knew how to find him. And when I did, I sent a simple message: "I believe we've both trusted someone who didn't deserve it." He responded within an hour. The conversation was brief, in person, over coffee. He didn't ask questions. He just sat, listened, and told me a few things Ethan had never shared. Secrets about past ventures, silent manipulations, debts paid off under the table. Nothing illegal. But enough to add color to the portrait of the man I had married. And through it all, Ethan smiled at me each night. He kissed me. He made plans. He looked into my eyes and said he loved me. And I smiled back, because that was the role I had chosen to play, for now. I no longer wanted a confrontation. I wanted comprehension. And when the moment came, I wanted him to feel it, not as an attack, but as the quiet, devastating realization that he had never understood the woman he thought he had so carefully deceived. I had barely begun processing what Rachel had given me when the next message arrived. It came late at night, 2 days after our meeting. I was alone in the living room, sipping a glass of water, the city lights casting soft shadows across the floor. Ethan was upstairs, brushing his teeth. My phone vibrated. A number I didn't recognize. The message read, "Rachel isn't the only one." That was it. Just 6 words. But the impact hit me like a second wave in the middle of a storm. My heart didn't race this time. It simply hardened. The confirmation I had feared now unfolded into something worse. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a pattern. A web. And I was only just beginning to see its full shape. I copied the number, ran it through a reverse search, and traced it to a registered office line. A marketing agency downtown. I scanned the agency's team page, looking at the faces. One of them jumped out immediately, Julia M., listed as a communications manager. She worked with Ethan. I remembered her from events, dinners, the polite hellos exchanged in corridors and company functions. I clicked her LinkedIn. Scrolled. Noticed she had been with the company for over 4 years. Long enough to have known Ethan before I came into his life. I looked at her posts, her photos, the tags. One stood out, an old picture, blurry and uncaptioned, taken at a company retreat. Ethan and Julia, side by side. Drinks in hand. Her smile broad, relaxed. His hand on her waist. I felt nothing. Not shock. Not sadness. Just a quiet resolve deepening inside me. The next morning, after Ethan left for work, I got in my car and drove to the agency. I waited outside until lunch hour, watching employees filter out. And then I saw her, Julia. She walked alone, earphones in, scrolling her phone as she headed toward a coffee shop across the street. I followed. When she stepped inside and ordered, I walked up beside her. I didn't speak until she had her drink in hand. Then I said softly, "You texted me." She turned. Her eyes flicked up to mine, wide with shock. But only for a moment. "You're Aline." "I am." She looked around. "You want to sit?" We took a table in the corner. She didn't apologize. Didn't smile. She just set her coffee down and met my gaze directly. "I didn't do it out of guilt," she said. "I did it because he lies to everyone. I'm not defending myself." I said nothing. "He told me you knew. That you had some sort of arrangement. That it wasn't a real marriage. That it was about appearances." I raised an eyebrow. "You believed that?" I didn't want to believe anything else. She looked down, then back at me. "I knew he was married. I knew your name. I just didn't care enough until I realized he was telling the same stories to someone else." I saw a message from Rachel pop up once. I asked. He said she was a cousin. I laughed. Then I found out he told her you were separated. And that made me wonder how many more of us there were. "How long?" I asked. "About 1.5 years. On and off. Business trips. Conferences. Sometimes lunch in his car. I'm not proud of it." "And now?" She took a deep breath. "Now I'm done. And I wanted you to know." We sat in silence for a moment. "Do you still see him at work?" I asked. She nodded. "But I keep my distance. I've removed myself from his projects." Quietly. "He hasn't noticed. Or he pretends not to." I studied her. Unlike Rachel, Julia knew what she was doing. She had entered the lie knowingly. But even she had not seen how deep it went. Even she had reached a breaking point. I stood. Thank you for telling me. She looked up. What are you going to do? Not what he expects. I left the cafe without looking back. That night, Ethan wrapped his arms around me in bed. He whispered that he loved me, that this had been a perfect week. I closed my eyes and rested my head against his chest. But I wasn't listening to his words anymore. I was listening to the silence in between. And in that silence, I finally understood, I wasn't married to a man. I was married to a facade, a careful architecture of seduction, deception, and repetition. And I still didn't know the reason why. I no longer flinched at his touch. No longer questioned his lies. I studied them. Ethan had become a case study, my private subject of observation. And as he moved through the world with the confidence of someone still in control, I was already 3 steps ahead. I had learned how to smile when I wanted to scream. How to laugh when all I wanted was to expose him. But it wasn't time yet. Not until every move had been made. The first thing I did was change the safe's code. We had a safe in our closet, a symbolic one, more for jewelry and personal documents than anything truly valuable. Ethan used to say it was ours. But now, everything inside it mattered more to me than to him. Bank information. Property agreements. Some of his confidential documents, carelessly thrown in without attention. One morning, I waited until he left for a jog, opened it quietly, and changed the code. I didn't write it down. I didn't need to. Next, I began auditing our financial life. He had always handled most of the money, investments, accounts, transactions. I pretended to be the clueless wife learning to be responsible. I asked questions sweetly, sat beside him as he explained things in simple terms, praised his brilliance. Meanwhile, I requested copies of our financial statements in my name, created a spreadsheet he didn't know existed, and started tracking every transfer. Every deduction. Every inconsistency. The apartment lease was in both our names, but the paperwork had gaps, clauses Ethan had ignored when we signed. Clauses I now understood gave me quiet leverage. I contacted our lawyer, posed as a wife concerned about future planning, and updated our agreement. Discreetly, without drawing attention. Every signature I placed now was mine alone. I also started recording everything. It began with my phone. Then with a discreet recorder hidden inside a decorative vase near the kitchen. Ethan had a habit of speaking freely at home, bragging about deals, venting about people, letting things slip when he thought no one was really listening. The device caught it all. His arrogance. His laughter when telling stories about manipulating clients. His casual disrespect toward the very women he used to charm. He had no idea. He was too busy being comfortable, believing he had succeeded in erasing every trace of guilt. He smiled more than usual. Took me to dinner. Gave me compliments he probably didn't mean. At night, he wrapped himself around me like everything was whole. But I was already gone. I also started collecting people. Quietly. The accountant had been the first. I booked a second meeting, this time alone, and asked for a detailed review of our joint assets. I played the role of the loyal wife, concerned about long-term planning. But what I was really doing was finding the loopholes. And he helped, even if he didn't realize how much. He showed me how things had been split. Where my name was missing. Where it could still be added. Then came Ethan's former partner, still bitter, still angry. We met again, and this time, I asked him to tell me the story Ethan had never told. About how their company fell apart. About the hidden accounts. The deals Ethan had made behind his back. There were no police reports. Nothing illegal. Just betrayal. Just Ethan being Ethan. I always thought he'd end up buried by his own ego, the man said. But he always finds a new mask. I smiled. He married one. He looked at me. And what are you going to do? Give him a mirror. I spent the following weeks gathering digital evidence. Saving copies of Rachel's files. Screenshots of messages Julia had forwarded me. photos, email threads. I organized it all into folders, labeled clearly, stored on encrypted drives. I wasn't building revenge. I was building truth. One night, Ethan left his laptop open. A mistake he would come to regret. I accessed it calmly, knowing what to look for. A hidden folder buried inside another. Encrypted. But not to me. I knew enough about his habits, his passwords, the pattern of logic he thought only he understood. Inside were documents, conversations, photographs. At least 2 other names I didn't recognize, women he had messaged using fake accounts. He kept everything. As if some part of him needed to archive his lies. To relive them. Or maybe, deep down, he believed no one would ever catch him. That arrogance would be his undoing. The next morning, I made breakfast like always. Eggs. Toast. Coffee just the way he liked it. He kissed me on the forehead, oblivious. I looked at him and thought, he believes I'm still his. But the woman sitting across from him was not the woman who stood by him at the altar. That woman was gone. What remained now was a force he hadn't anticipated. And every day, in silence, I was getting closer. It started with the papers. Not important ones. Just small things, bank statements that didn't arrive where they used to, contracts he remembered signing but couldn't find. Then there were the passwords that no longer worked, the logins that mysteriously reset, the safe that refused to open. He didn't panic, not at first. Ethan was too confident for that. He joked about it. Called it a glitch, or blamed the systems. But I could see it in his eyes, confusion. Subtle. Fleeting. But growing. And then he started watching me. It wasn't obvious at first. A glance too long while I answered emails. Pauses before asking, everything all right? I replied with a smile every time. Perfectly. My tone was gentle. My eyes soft. I gave him no reason to doubt me, no evidence to point toward. But he knew. He began to feel it, not in what I said, but in what I didn't. I wasn't cold. I wasn't angry. I was something worse, unreadable. I was no longer reacting the way he expected. No longer asking where he'd been, who he was texting, what time he'd be home. My silence had become a language he didn't speak. One evening, he came home early. I was on the sofa, reading a book I had read twice before. He stood at the doorway, keys still in hand, staring at me like I was a puzzle missing too many pieces. Long day? I asked without looking up. Yeah, he said, slowly. Strange day. I looked up and smiled. Want wine? He nodded, but didn't sit. Just kept staring. Over dinner, he tried to test the waters. So, he said, I noticed the lease paperwork came through again. Thought we'd settled all that months ago. I sipped my wine. It was just an update. New format. Nothing important. Right. A pause. Funny how many things are changing lately. I tilted my head. Like what? He hesitated. Then smiled. Nothing, I guess. Just feels that way. He was trying to provoke a slip. A twitch. A confession. But I gave him nothing. I had rehearsed this for weeks. Later that night, I found him going through drawers. He said he was looking for receipts. I offered to help. He declined. The next day, he called the accountant. I knew because the accountant called me right after. He asked if I've seen you lately, he said. Tried to sound casual. But it wasn't. I thanked him. Hung up. And smiled to myself. Ethan had finally realized something was unraveling. And for the first time, he was unsure of the thread's end. His energy changed. He started coming home earlier. Brought flowers once. Booked dinner reservations at a place we hadn't been in years. He touched me more, lightly, often. As if trying to feel whether the woman beside him was still real. But what haunted him wasn't my distance. It was my calm. One afternoon, I walked into his home office without knocking. He jumped slightly, closing a browser tab. "What are you working on?" I asked sweetly. "Nothing. Just tracking some expenses. Anything I can help with?" He shook his head. Too quickly. "It's fine." I leaned against the doorframe. "You've been different lately." He looked up, alarm flickering across his face. "Have I?" I nodded slowly. "Quieter. Nervous." He laughed, too loud. "Nervous? About what?" "That's the question, isn't it?" I left him sitting in that silence. The next few nights, he barely slept. I heard him pacing when he thought I was asleep, opening and closing drawers. One morning, he left for work an hour early and returned with nothing new to say. His paranoia had begun to consume him. And yet, he still clung to the illusion. He still thought he could fix it with flowers and forced affection. He still believed I was within reach. But I was already gone. And for the first time, he sensed it. That whatever power he once held over me was slipping through his fingers. And the worst part for him? He didn't know how. Or when. Or why. But I did. Ethan had spent years mastering the art of control, subtle, seductive, effective. But he had underestimated the one variable he couldn't manipulate, a woman who had finally stopped loving him. I needed more than evidence. More than anger. I needed understanding. Not of the betrayal, I already knew what that was. I needed to understand why. Why a man like Ethan, with so much charm, intelligence, and ease, would waste his own life weaving a net of lies. Why the man I married had never really existed. Why he built a castle out of illusions only to live like a fugitive inside it. It was the accountant who led me to the first thread. In a brief meeting under the guise of reviewing long-term assets, he hesitated, then looked at me with something close to pity. "I shouldn't be telling you this," he said, "but Ethan, he's done this before." I didn't flinch. "Before me?" He nodded. "More than once." With a few nudges, a few names, I followed the trail. I found Claire first. Her full name was in one of the oldest business filings Ethan had touched. Claire D. I searched until I found her profile, then her email. I wrote simply, "I believe we were both part of the same story." She responded within hours. We met in a bookstore cafe, far from downtown. She arrived early, already seated, wearing a quiet expression of someone who no longer wanted answers, only closure. Her hair was grayer than in the photos I'd seen, but her eyes were sharp. "You're the current wife," she said, without warmth or disdain. Just observation. I answered. She nodded. "Then let me guess. You found the others. And now you're looking for the beginning." I sat down. "How long were you with him?" "Almost 5 years. I met him when he was starting a new project. Said I inspired him. Said I made him believe in love again." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out, he'd used the same line on the woman before me. I found her eventually. Same cycle. Same story." She leaned in. "He doesn't fall in love. He conquers." I said nothing. "He finds women who are bright, generous, loyal. The kind who give the benefit of the doubt. He reads them fast, learns their rhythm. Then he wraps himself around their insecurities and dreams. He becomes whatever they need most. Until he doesn't." Claire showed me photos. Emails. Proof. His pattern was clear. He entered lives like a gust of wind, fast, passionate, unpredictable. He promised futures. Then slowly, he took control, emotionally, financially, socially. And when it began to collapse, he disappeared. Left them questioning their memory of love. Of themselves. But with you, she said, he did something different. I looked at her. He married you. I nodded. He bound himself legally. Financially. Publicly. Exactly. That means one of two things: either you are his final masterpiece, or you are the one he underestimated. Claire wasn't bitter. She had done the work. Therapy. Distance. Rebuilding. But her voice still trembled at times. Not with pain. With rage that had turned into resolve. I told her about Rachel. About Julia. About the recordings. The documents. The quiet preparation. She leaned back and smiled. He has no idea, does he? No good. Don't let him see it coming. I left the meeting with a flash drive full of Claire's files. Her testimony. Her receipts. Everything that painted a picture of a man who didn't just cheat, he sculpted betrayal into an art form. Back home, I added it to my collection. That night, Ethan made dinner. Pasta. Wine. Soft music. He laughed when I complimented the sauce. I could open a restaurant, he said. You'd be great at it, I answered. We sat across from each other like a scene in a movie he still believed he was directing. But I wasn't reading his script anymore. I was writing my own. In the following days, I tracked down the second woman Claire had mentioned. She refused to meet in person, but her email was clear: if you're gathering truth, I have mine. But I won't go through this again. Use what you need. She attached screenshots. Voice notes. Financial transfers. Each file told the same story, with different names, different cities, different lies. And in every one, the constant remained Ethan. He had studied women the way one studies an opponent, finding their weaknesses, turning them into admiration. He wasn't impulsive. He was methodical. And when the structure cracked, he walked away, untouched. But this time, he had made a mistake. He had married a woman who noticed everything. A woman who didn't scream or break. A woman who had turned silence into armor. And while he watched me from across the dinner table, wondering what had changed, I already knew the ending he would never see coming. I chose a Thursday night. He wouldn't expect it. Thursdays were predictable. Ethan came home early, poured himself a drink, scrolled through the news while dinner cooked. It was our rhythm. Safe. Familiar. Perfect for a night that would end everything he thought he controlled. I planned the details meticulously. Candles on the table. A wine he loved. Music from our wedding playlist playing softly through the speakers. I wore the dress he had once said made me unforgettable. Everything designed to put him at ease. To lower his guard. He walked in at 7 o'clock, briefcase in hand, surprised by the ambience. Well, this is unexpected, he said, smiling. What's the occasion? I kissed his cheek. Just us. Just a moment. He set his things down, loosened his tie, looked around. His eyes softened. You've been different lately, he said. Distant. But tonight feels like us. I poured wine, handed him a glass, and toasted. To truth, I said. He laughed, lifting his glass. To love. We ate slowly. Talked about nothing. I let him lead the conversation: work gossip, a new project, an old friend he ran into. He was relaxed, even playful. He believed the performance. When the plates were cleared and the last note of the song faded, I stood. Walked to the cabinet. Retrieved the folder. The flash drive. My phone. I placed them in front of him one by one. What's this? He asked, confused. I sat down. Met his eyes. Evidence, I said softly. He stared at the folder. Then back at me. Evidence of what? Of who you are. Of what you've done. Rachel. Julia. Claire. The others. Silence. I have your emails. Your texts. Hotel confirmations. Audio recordings. Photos. Transfers. Voice messages. His jaw clenched. Where did you get? Everywhere. You left trails. You always do. He reached for the folder, but I stopped him with a look. This isn't a negotiation, Ethan. He laughed, coldly now. This is ridiculous. You can try to deny it. But you know it's all there. He stood, pacing. So what? This is some kind of trap. You want a confession? I don't need a confession. I have the truth. He turned to me, eyes burning. And what do you want, Aline? I want you to remember this moment. Forever. He narrowed his eyes. You're bluffing. I smiled. You always thought I was too emotional. Too trusting. Too soft. He stepped forward. I can explain, no, I said. You can't. Because I'm not here to listen. I'm here to let you know that the game is over. You swore love to me. I swore I'd never forget what someone does to a woman who gives everything. He froze. I reached into the folder. Pulled out the flash drive Rachel gave me. The one with messages, dates, photos. The one that connected every lie. I placed it on the table. Then I showed him a document, a preliminary legal petition. I didn't say the word, but he saw it in bold: separation, dissolution of marital assets, infidelity. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. I've already filed, I said. You'll be served next week. The process is in motion. The evidence is enough to destroy your leverage. Financially. Publicly. Socially. He dropped into the chair, hands gripping his knees. I gave you everything, I said quietly. And you tried to bury me in your secrets. He looked up. I didn't mean, you never mean anything. That's your shield. But now, intention doesn't matter. Only consequences. He stood again, angrier now. You think you can take me down? I don't need to. You already built the fall yourself. I'm just holding the mirror. We stood in silence. Finally, I leaned in. You were always afraid of being ordinary, Ethan. That's why you played this game. But now, you'll be remembered not for brilliance, but for arrogance. He opened his mouth, but I turned away. The music was still playing. Faint. I walked to the speaker and turned it off. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. He stayed seated as I picked up the documents, the flash drive, and my phone. I walked upstairs. Behind me, I heard nothing. No apology. No anger. Just the sound of a man who had finally realized the mask had cracked. And I was no longer beneath it. The confrontation had been carefully staged, but by the time Ethan sat stunned at the dining table, the real damage had already been done. What he didn't understand, what he couldn't possibly have imagined, was that the moment he first lied to me, he'd started a countdown. And I had counted every second. Before that dinner, before the folder, before the first word of truth crossed the air between us, I had already built my exit. Quietly. Efficiently. Irrevocably. The process of separation had begun weeks earlier. With the help of a lawyer recommended by Claire, I had filed the necessary petitions for marital dissolution. Grounds: infidelity, emotional abuse, financial misrepresentation. The evidence, every message, every photo, every bank trail, had been notarized, timestamped, and attached to a legal strategy that protected my assets and decimated his. I had transferred 50% of our joint funds into a separate account under my name. Legally sound. Strategically timed. Every move made under consultation. Ethan would discover the missing numbers soon, and when he did, he'd find walls built around them, reinforced with signatures and codes he no longer controlled. But the legal part was only the beginning. While he slept, while he smiled and made love to the woman he believed was still his, I was speaking to the board of directors at the company where he held a senior position. I had compiled a dossier. Not about his infidelity, about his misuse of company accounts, his relationships with subordinates, his hidden payments disguised as project expenses. It wasn't vindictive. It was corporate liability. The board listened. They thanked me. And they moved quickly. 3 days after our dinner, Ethan was called into a closed-door meeting. By the time he came home, silent, pale, eyes hollow, he was no longer employed. He didn't speak a word to me that night. Just stared at his dinner plate, untouched, while I read a book across the table. The media exposure followed faster than expected. Not tabloids. Not gossip. But whispers in professional networks. A quiet severance. A statement from the company about ethical concerns and internal review. Investors pulled back. Partners distanced themselves. Doors that once opened for him now remained shut. And I stayed calm. I moved out without ceremony. The new apartment had already been secured in my name, the lease signed weeks ago. A modest space, full of light and silence. There were no memories there. No ghosts. Just possibility. The day I left, he stood at the door. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To a future," I said. "Without me?" I nodded. His face crumbled, but I didn't flinch. I had grieved him already, in silence, in shadows, in sleepless nights. Now, I owed him nothing. Rachel messaged me days later. She had seen the news. "Did you do this?" "I did what needed to be done," I wrote. She sent a single reply, "Thank you." Julia left the company voluntarily. I heard through quiet channels she'd moved to another city. A clean start. I wished her that. Claire sent flowers. No note. Just flowers. And I stood in my new kitchen, arranging them in a vase, breathing in their quiet scent, finally understanding what peace meant. Not absence of noise, but absence of fear. Ethan tried to call. Once. Twice. Then stopped. He sent one message, "You ruined me." I didn't reply. He was wrong. He had ruined himself. I had only turned the lights on. Peace didn't arrive with fireworks or grand gestures. It slipped in quietly, like morning light through half-drawn curtains. It came in small moments, in the sound of my own breath without tension, in the absence of lies threading the silence around me. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing. I wasn't watching my back. I wasn't guessing what version of reality I was being fed. I was simply alone. And that aloneness wasn't emptiness. It was space. Finally. I moved into a modest apartment on the edge of the city. White walls. Wooden floors. Big windows. No history. No residue. Just a blank canvas. I left behind the expensive furniture, the curated photos, the symbolic wedding gifts. I took only what was mine: books, notebooks, a few clothes, and the flash drive. The one Rachel gave me. I didn't need it anymore. But I kept it. A reminder. A trophy, perhaps not of victory, but of survival. I didn't seek revenge. I never had. My war had never been about destruction. It had been about truth, clarity, liberation. Ethan lost his job, his standing, and eventually his reputation. But that wasn't my triumph. My triumph was internal. Subtle. It was being able to sit by a window with tea in hand and not feel like I was waiting for a storm. I enrolled in a psychology course. Something long postponed. Years ago, I had wanted to understand people, not academically, but emotionally. I had shelved that dream in favor of a life that made room for Ethan's ambitions. Now, I was reclaiming that curiosity. Not to become a therapist. Not yet. But to begin again. To study the patterns I had lived through. To learn how others heal. How I could help. The classroom was small. The professor kind. I sat in the back row, notebook open, listening with an attentiveness I hadn't felt in years. Trauma, boundaries, gaslighting, identity. Each term felt like a mirror held gently in front of me. I took notes not as a student, but as a woman who had lived each definition. One of the first assignments was to write a short reflection on the concept of emotional erosion. I wrote, "It doesn't happen all at once. It's a soft, daily removal of pieces of yourself. Until one day you look in the mirror and see a stranger with your face." I didn't submit it. I kept it. Weeks passed. I began a podcast. It wasn't polished. It wasn't loud. Just my voice, once a week, talking about subtle abuse, invisible betrayals, the psychology of manipulation. I didn't use names. I didn't tell my story. I just spoke as if I were talking to someone who needed to be told they weren't crazy. That intuition is real. That silence is not consent. That endurance is not the same as love. The response was quiet but consistent. Messages from women. Some from men. Stories. Confessions. Gratitude. Each one proof that I wasn't alone. That none of us ever are. I didn't become famous. I didn't need to. But I became visible, to myself. In cafes, people began to recognize my voice. Not often. But sometimes. One woman stopped me, tears in her eyes, and said, "Your words helped me leave." I smiled. I didn't ask for details. She didn't offer them. Some truths are best held gently, without dissection. Ethan disappeared from public life. I heard through someone that he had moved to another state. Started something new under another name. Still searching for control. Still trying to rewrite his story. But I didn't follow. I didn't care. He no longer occupied space in my present. He was just a chapter. One I had finished writing. One night, alone in my new apartment, I looked in the mirror for a long time. Not searching for scars. Not seeking strength. Just looking. And seeing someone real. Someone whole. I smiled. For the first time in years, the woman smiling back wasn't pretending. Years passed. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just steady, unfolding with the quiet dignity that time offers when it's finally yours again. I rebuilt my life piece by piece, not for show, not for revenge, not even for healing. I rebuilt it simply because it was mine to rebuild. And in doing so, I discovered something deeper than survival. I found clarity. Integrity. Silence without fear. Peace without permission. I didn't remarry. Not because I feared love, but because I no longer needed someone to complete anything. I was not a half searching for a whole. I had become enough. I traveled alone. I took photos of oceans and alleyways. I read novels in languages I had never dared learn before. I attended conferences, gave workshops, mentored women starting their paths in psychology, in media, in life. And when people asked about my story, I gave only pieces. Never names. Never the past in full. Some things belonged to the silence they emerged from. One autumn evening, I was invited to speak at a university in another city. The auditorium was packed, mostly women, mostly young. Eager eyes, notebooks open. They introduced me as a voice that changed the way we talk about silent manipulation. I stood at the podium, the spotlight warm on my face, and looked out at the crowd. I told them about resilience. About awareness. About how the hardest part isn't leaving, it's trusting yourself after you do. They listened. They nodded. Some cried. And then, during the Q&A, a young woman stood. Her voice trembled slightly. Do you believe in forgiveness? The room fell silent. I took a breath. Let the question settle. Then I said, forgiveness is freedom. But forgetting is weakness. The audience was still. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. That night, I left the building after everyone had gone. The auditorium lights were dimmed. My heels echoed softly down the hallway. I stepped outside, into the cool air, and looked up at the stars. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I opened the message. 3 words. I miss you. I stared at the screen. No punctuation. No name. But I didn't need one. I knew the rhythm of that voice. The cowardice disguised as longing. The reach of someone who never truly believed I would walk away and never turn back. I didn't hesitate. I deleted it. No reply. No reaction. No rage. Just deletion. The final gesture of someone who no longer carried what she didn't choose. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Looked up again at the night sky. And whispered to myself, not in bitterness, not in pain, but in absolute certainty, never betray a woman in silence. That was all. No applause. No audience. Just a woman alone in the dark, whole and unbreakable. And that was the end.